let's start with some puzzles as we did last time. So yeah, white to move. Let's think about the move. Okay, we have Clara join in. How are you, Clara? Can you hear me? So we just started and let's try to solve this puzzle. White to move. So right now I think the black king is exposed, right? Hello, Clara. Now I can see you. How are you?
Good.
Good. Good, good. Nice. So yes, take your time. Think about the best move. Jaden,
Queen to H7 check.
queen to h7 check. Cool. Before we move on, Jane also raised a hand. Jane, do you agree?
Yes, but when I calculated a lot of moves after, it just results lots of trading.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, let's try. Let's see. First of all, we cannot move queen to h8, right? Because the black queen is controlling that. Yeah, I think you noticed that. Okay, queen h7, and I think king f8. That is the only move. And what's next? Jaden, your hand is up. And also, do you have any idea? Moving on. You're muted, Jaden.
Maybe you could play like Queen to H8, trade until there's one rook and then one rook and a rook. Um,
Yeah. So if we trade, for example, our queen and a one rook from either side, which side is better after the trade? So for example, I mean, we have a rook at e1, black have a rook at c5. These are the pieces remaining. And how many pawns do we have? Because this is endgame. Pawns are important. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have four, right? I count for you. How many pawns does black have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So black actually has one extra pawn. So which means if we trade the queens and if we trade the h1 rook with the da rook, um, I'm not so confident that we can, dominate the game. Or do I miss something? Can we win material? Queen h8, queen h8, rook h8, king e7. I think this is also like Jane, you said, right? There are a lot of trade upcoming if we put like queen h8. So yeah, so can we have another like better outcome than this one? Does anyone has any idea? So, when I look at this position, I have two ways of like thinking that could help. So first of all, for example, we have already like control the H file, and for example, can we attack the king from the G file? If we can attack the king from another file, maybe in some way, when we combine our rook and the queen, maybe we can get something, I don't know. So for example, does queen h6 work? What I'm thinking is, can we take the g5 pawn?
Rook's protecting it right now.
No, you're right. You're right. So the rook at c5, the defense on the g5 pawn is quite solid. It looks like we cannot do anything on the g file. Queen g6, no. g7 protected, g5 protected. Okay. So yeah, I mean attacking from the g file doesn't work. Cool. Then I have a second idea. Can we in some way remove the defender? So for example, what is the defender on h8? Of course, the black queen. So is there any way that we can remove the queen, or I don't know how to put it. Is there any way we can, yeah, force the queen, like make it cannot defend h8? Jaden, your hand is up.
Oh. You could play like e5, and then if rook takes, you can play rook takes.
Okay, e5. What is the purpose of pushing the pawn?
So like trying to block off the queen.
So we can block or we can cut off this diagonal, right? And did you say if the rook take our pawn, what you gonna do?
I'm probably gonna. I want to like just play queen to h8 instantly.
Exactly. So this is what we like cut off this diagonal. This is a beautiful way to attack. So we cut off this like this path where the queen controlling h8. Cool, it looks something we can try. But is there any way black can defend? I mean, after e5, we are going to move the queen to h8. So, for example, can the king escape? For example, if the king moves to f8. Clara, what do you mean black also has a checkmate? What do you mean?
So if e5
Mm-hmm.
and queen d1, then the wait, never mind. No.
Okay, I see your point. Yeah, it's good to be aware of the background. And yeah, it's good to check. We have two rooks, so we are happy. It's safe for now. But it's a very good. I mean, it's a very good input because you know what? I was also thinking about rook d1 because we talked about like, you know, forcing the queen away from h8, right? But rook d1, that is a blunder because queen takes, queen rook d1, a dead. So cannot move queen rook d1. So let's come back from like e5. What about a king move to f8? Clara.
Um. If we do that, then queen h6 check, and then you win the pawn.
Okay, we can win a pawn. That's a fork. Okay. Can we win something more? I always wanted to win more. I'm so demanding sometimes. Queen h6, yeah, we can win the g5 pawn for sure. But can we win something more? Clara.
Oh, and then after, if if the king escapes to f8, then queen h8 check. And then after queen e7, you take the rook, and then the king wait. Yeah, the king takes or the queen takes. If the queen takes, then the rook does a skewer. But then if the king takes, then there's a pin on d1.
Yes. If king does the pin on d1, but what if wait, when you check at h8, black king moves to e7, right? And if we take the rook immediately, you're right, if the king takes the rook, we can move rook to d1, we can at least pin the queen. But what about the queen take our queen? I think there is no pin or skewer anymore. The king at e7, the queen at d8. E5, king f8. We talked about queen h8, king e7. I think we are on the right track. After king to e7, what can we do? Do you guys want me move the pieces on the board to see if we're on the right track? Let's try that. E5. Okay, so the computer played queen d3, but we need to check like king f8 like later. Okay, queen to d3. I mean, we cannot move queen to c2. I think the only move is king to a1. I don't know. Okay, then we solve it. But let's check. What if black moved the king to f8? We play e5, king to f8. Okay, I moved the piece. I made one move, and king to h8, king to e7. Cool. Can we win material? Jada.
Queen to f6 check.
Queen to f6 check. And if the king goes to d7?
King goes rook to d1 then.
Yes, then we can play rook to d1 because the king is like between the rook and the queen. So we don't need to worry about queen taking our rook. So we can pin the queen. Good. And what about king goes to e8?
Rook to h8.
Yes, rook h8. Let me move the pieces. And the king go up. We can take the rook with our rook. It's not the mate. The king can go to c7, but we can win the queen. And definitely we can win. Yes, so this is the puzzle. This is the essence of this one is e5. To cut off the queen, defending like h8. Good. And does black has any other defensive move? For example, this one, it doesn't work. We can check at h6 first and then mate at h8. What about f5? I don't know. What about f5? After f5, the black king can move to f7 at least. It's good that we can, think of all the possibilities before we move pieces. Jaden.
Queen to h7.
Queen h7 and king to f8.
King f8. Can you just take the f5 pawn check?
Yes, we can. And the king move, for example, to, I don't know, e8. What you gonna do?
Rook to h8 check.
and king goes to e7.
E7.
Mm.
You
move rook to h8, the king goes up to e7.
E7. Move the queen to f6.
Yeah, queen f6, great. And the black king has to move to d7, and we can win the d8 rook. Clara, do you want to add something? Your hand is up.
What happens if we just play queen h8 immediately?
Queen h8, and the king goes to f7.
And then queen f6.
Yeah, queen f6. Yeah, I think it's a very good. I mean, king goes to e8. What you gonna do? Rook to h8. Yeah, I can move pieces. I think it's quite straightforward in rook h8. Yes, and the king go up. We can win the rook or something. So queen h7, I think also work. I mean, the black king is so exposed, so we have plenty of way to win the game or winning materials, winning huge materials. Good. So after calculate all the possibilities, I think I can make the choice e5. So that is great. Cool. We have spent some time on this puzzle, but I think it's worth spending the time. So let's move to the agenda for today. So I would like to share some game. I think this is from you, Jaden, right? And I would like to share some positions. I think it's very valuable to all of us. One of is the piece exchanging. We talked about it in our past lessons. I think this is a very good example. And also thank you for sharing that. And another topic is about end game. We can work together to find the best move when we review the game. So first of all, so this is a position. White has two rooks, a knight. Black has two rooks, a knight, and either side have 6 pawns. So I have a question to you all. So which side is better? I mean, in general, I think the position is quite close. I mean, quite balanced, equalized. But if it has to be one side is better than the other one, which side is better? Jaden, what do you think? Now it's black to move. And which side is better?
Black, when she has the space advantage.
Space advantage. Okay, yeah, black has these 2 pawns and center higher up. Okay, Jane, what do you think?
Black because white has an isolated pawn
H2, you mean?
by 2 squares.
Okay. So yeah, it's far away from the E3. It's so isolated. Cool. Thank you. Clara, what do you think? Which side is better?
Uh, uh, uh,
Now it's black to move. Do you also agree black's better slightly?
yeah.
Okay. So let's turn on the engine to see if we are sensitive. It looks like we are on the right track. Black is better because the score is minus 0.58. So black's better. That's good. Cool. After reviewing the position, so in this game, black play f4, offering a pawn exchange. So let's review something we learned. It's about piece exchange. So when we calculate the piece exchange, we would ask ourselves basic 2 questions. First, if we accept exchange, what would happen? Or if we don't trade the pieces, if we don't take the pawn, what will happen? And which one give us the best outcome? So, okay. A question to you all. Are you going to take the f4 pawn or not? black pushed the pawn to f4. Shall we take that or not? Jane?
No, because then you make another isolated pawn.
What do you mean?
It's isolated, so well, black doesn't have to take.
You mean white? Now it's white move.
Yeah, black once you've took the black pawn, the black doesn't have to take it. They could leave it.
You mean after I take f4?
Yeah.
But I mean, leave it would have been like.
Actually, maybe it's a bit better for white.
Or to be specific, if white take the pawn, what could be the move from black? Is black going to take it back or something else?
I don't know.
Yeah. Let's think about it. It's a relevant question. Jaden, what do you think?
I think that I would take it, because if you don't take it, then you could just play like f3 and kick your knight back, and then f2.
So
That'd be annoying.
if I don't take the pawn will push down, yeah, and this is the passed pawn. Okay. But my question, I mean, that's a good point, but just follow up with a question. I mean, even though I take it, there is still an f passed pawn. It can still like go down, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't change the fact that black has a passed pawn at f5. So what would change if we take the pawn? So for example, if I don't take the pawn, I mean, of course, black will take my pawn. What if I play e4? I refuse to take the pawn. I just push the pawn up. Comparing like taking the pawn and push it to e4. So which one favors white? Clara, what do you think? Are you willing to take the f4 pawn?
Yeah.
Any reason?
I think so.
Any reason behind it?
Because
Yeah, that's a tough question, to be honest. So sometimes like this question doesn't like raise up in our head when we play chess. So let me share my idea. So let's compare two positions. One is taking the pawn, black taking that, black has a passed pawn, and it's still supported by the rook and the knight. We cannot win the pawn, so the pawn is quite solid here. But if we don't take the pawn, first of all, I mean the pawn can still like go down, or black can keep it as it is, right? So, or take our e3. So if I push the pawn to e4, so there is a difference between this position and this one. So the difference is in this position, both sides have the e pawn. So which e pawn is more useful or helpful to the player? And my answer would be the e5 pawn is better than the e4. And Jaden, your hand is up.
I think e5 is more useful because it protects f4.
Yes, that's also my reason. So the e5 pawn is more helpful. It supports the f4 pawn. So which means this is a passed pawn. This is also a protected passed pawn. So black doesn't have to like keep the knight and rook protecting that. Black can move the knight around if that's necessary. So the e5 pawn is really helpful than the e4 pawn. So in this case, I think trading the pawn is the better choice because we don't have this e5 pawn anymore protecting f4. Cool. Let's check if we are on the right track. This is just the rationale, but maybe the computer has some different ideas, something you can learn. Okay, you see? So the best move for white is taking the pawn. I mean, even though black is still better, but this is the best outcome white can get. So taking the pawn. But let's turn off the engine. So after taking the pawn, so in this game, black played knight to f4. My next question is, pawn to f4 or knight to f4, which one is better for black? Or is there any difference between these two moves? Of course there's a difference, but does it matter? Does the difference matter? We can compare the positions as we did last time. So first of all is the e pawn taking f4, right? And we talked about that. There is a pass pawn and the rook, knight protecting that. The pawn is quite safe. This is a pass pawn. And what if the knight takes the pawn? Could we evaluate the position? So is there anything different from the previous one? Jaden?
There's gonna be more trades.
Yeah, black is offering a trade. Yes, that's true.
And if you don't take it, black will have a better knight.
Yeah, the knight is, I think, is stronger than being at g6. Cool. We look at the position of the knight. Then what about the pawn? Is there anything different in pawn structure? So in the previous position, we have a pawn at f4. And in this position, we have a pawn in e5. So which one is better for black? One at f4, another at e5. Which one is the better pawn? e5 or f4? I got a message from Jane. f4. Why do you think f4 is better?
F4 is better because it's a passed pawn, and the one on e5 it will be an isolated pawn.
Yes, I totally agree with you. So e5 is not a passed pawn, and also e5 is isolated. So then, very naturally, I have a follow-up question. So from white's perspective, when we think about should we trade the knights? Okay, Vicky is joining. Let's see. Hello, Vicky. How are you?
Good.
Good, cool. So we are talking about a position right now, and I am going to ask a question before you join in. So yes, let's ask all of you together. So now the position comes from a pawn exchange. We're talking about piece exchange. So black take the f4 pawn, and we talked about there could be two choices for black. One is taking down with the e5 pawn. Another is taking down with the g6 knight. And I was asking the rest of us, like, which one is better for black? And the conclusion is we should take it up with the e pawn, because if you look at the pawn structure, when the pawn moves to f4, the pawns are connected, and also the f4 pawn is a pass pawn. It's well protected, and it's a pass pawn. So taking that with the e pawn is the better choice for black. But during this game, our opponent take the pawn with the knight. So then my question is, should we exchange the knights? And here, I think white has two questions or two things to think about. First of all is we need to compare the position of the knights. So for example, if the black knight is better than us right now, I mean, if that's a stronger knight at f4, our knight is e2, maybe it's better for us to trade the knights. This is the first thing, evaluate the knight position. The second thing is evaluate the position of the pawn. If we don't take the knight, the black pawn will stay at e5. If we take the knight, if pawn takes, the pawn will move to f4. So think about these two questions and make your decision. Should we take the knight? And if you don't take the knight, what you gonna do? I got a message from Clara. You said no. What do you mean? Do you want to elaborate?
Because if we don't take the knight, the e5 pawn stays isolated, and the knight is pinned but protected. Whatever, it's still pinned, and
Do you have any more to say?
and then you can try you could and you might be able to just move the knight away or blah blah, and then after put pressure on the knight.
Cool. Yeah, I like your reasoning. Especially when you said if we don't take the knight, the pawn at e5 is still like isolated, right? Cool. So if we take the knight, the pawn will be like somehow connected with the g pawn, and also it's a pass pawn. Cool. Thank you very much. So does anyone else have any idea? Or if you agree with like refusing the exchange, where would you move the knight? I think we need to move the knight if we don't take the knight. So where should we move our e2 knight in this position? Vicky, what do you think? If you play as white, what you gonna do? Do you want to trade the knight, or do you want to, I don't know, move it away?
I want to trade.
You want to trade. And what is the reason?
Because if I don't take, and for example, I move my knight to c3, the black knight is really powerful.
So yeah, I mean the f4 knight is supported by the e5 pawn, and we don't have any pawn to kick it away. It controls a lot more, a lot of squares, right? But I'm very interested in the idea of moving the knight to c3. Did you say that? So what could be the destination where you want to move the knight after knight c3?
Knight to e4.
Knight to e4, it's a center square, and also it's an outpost because it's in front of isolated pawn. I mean, which means there's no pawn like kicking your knight away. So I mean, knight to c3, and I think without any doubt we can move knight to e4 later. So if we can move our knight to e4, e4, let's compare two knights again. So which knight is better? Or do we see any potential of our knight? I mean, I agree that the knight at f4 is a good knight. There's no piece attacking that. But is there any potential? Is anything we can improve the knight? And Jaden.
For the white knight, there may be a bit of trouble. They could like go to d6 and fork.
E6 and fork. Knight e6, right? This is one thing we can do. Yes, Clara. You're muted, Clara.
I also thought of the same thing, but I also thought of knight d5, and then after try make the rook go, so then it's another fork on e7.
Okay, we move the knight to d5 and somehow we can move the rook knight to e7.
But the knight was protecting it, and then after I had a lot of trouble, and then I forgot that I could go knight e4 instead.
Yeah. Forking is exciting. So yeah, I really love like forking with our knight. I think forking is one thing. So another thing is, let me conclude. So I agree. If I look at this position, I think our e2 knight is not as good as f4. But my conclusion, my idea is our knight has much more potential. There's much more thing we can do with our e2 knight, not only like forking at d6, but also because of the e5 pawn. So we can move our knight to somewhere, for example, like knight c3, knight e4, and Clara, go ahead.
And also, after you move the knight to e4, it's like it's an octopus knight. It controls every square it can.
Sorry, what do you mean?
It controls every square it can.
Yeah, it controls like at least, I mean, 8 square when at e4, right? It controls a lot of squares on the board. And another thing is because of the e5 pawn, I think our knight can maybe after like e4 we can move to d2 and then to c4 or f3, so we can attack the e5 pawn. So imagine we have a position knight to c3, rook to e1, move the rook up. I mean, of course, we need to be aware any fork from the knight, but I'm just like planning something we can do, like rook to e4, rook to e1. We can add a lot of pressure on the e5 pawn. And somehow we can move the knight to f3 or c4. But if you look at the f4 knight, it's there, I know it's there, but the knight cannot attack anything. It aimed at d3, but I don't think the knight can do anything on d3 because the d3 pawn is well protected. And we have isolated on h2, but I don't think the knight can attack the like this rook pawn. So my conclusion is, if I play as white, I think the best move shouldn't be taking the f4 pawn, because first of all, it improves the pawn structure of black. And another thing is, I can see a lot of potential of our knight. We can move it around to attack e5 or something. So let's turn on the engine to see if the engine agree with any of us. Okay, you see? I mean, the best move for white is knight g3. And then you have this 0.00, which means both sides are balanced. I can't say white is way better, but at least it's better than the previous position, because if you remember previously, black is slightly better. But knight g3, knight g3, I'm not sure why knight g3. I mean, knight g3 and knight c3, it's so close. There's just a 0.01 difference between this move. I think this move are equally good, 93 or 93. We can move the knight to the center. Okay, so in this game, we take the knight. And a question to you all, if you play as black, would you take that with the rook or the pawn? This is a follow-up question from our previous position. Is taking that with the rook better or taking that with the pawn better? Rook. Jaden, why do you think taking that with the rook is better?
Because if you take it with the rook and the opponent takes back, you still have your passed pawn, and then they will find it harder to defend.
But what if your opponent don't take your rook?
Opponent.
If white can white
Okay.
hmm?
And if my opponent doesn't take his pawn, my rook, and like a rook e1, for example, we could play rook to d8 and push it.
So yeah, so here is a question. I mean, if black take the rook, that's white has to take the rook. If white has to take the rook, then black will have this passed pawn anyway. Like sooner or later, just a matter of sooner or later. But can white refuse to take the rook? If I play rook to e1, I want to attack the isolated pawn. Did you say rook e8? Protect the pawn? Black can push it, maybe. Can black push that? For example, if I move rook to g3, if you push that, can I pin you with rook to e3? Because you cannot take my pawn, I can take your rook. So my idea is, I think white can say no to this trade and move the rook away a bit and attacking e5. So this is the isolated pawn, and we should of course like leave it at the e5. So in this game we trade the rooks and rook f8. And I think from this game we realized that the connected pawn are super powerful, right? So this is how the game goes. So we play king to e3, and these two pawns connected. Once the pawn connected, it's super powerful and annoying. But we can still like get a draw, or I mean equalize the position. So the question is, I mean, after rook to e8, this is not a best move in my eyes, because white king can move to f4, and black play king to h5 to protect the pawn. And my last question for this game is, how can we break this connected pawns? Because if we cannot break that, our rook and king will be stuck here forever. Vicky.
Pawn to h3.
Yes, let's see if that works. So pawn to h3. What would be the move from black? If black take our pawn, can we take that? Maybe we should have taken the. Oh, well, yeah, that's a good question. If black take our pawn, what you gonna do? Should we take that with the king, or should we take that with a rook, or maybe wait a bit, do something else? I think the question is more about if we take the king, of course we can move the king to g3 later, but what about the rook trade? Do we need to worry about this? Jaden?
You don't really need to worry, because when you take it, the king takes that. If h2, we can play king to g2.
But if black move the king, for example,
King to g1.
into g1, and if I move king to here, because my king cannot save the h3, but I will move to this side. What are you gonna do?
I don't know.
I mean, we have to take the h pawn, right? Because If we don't take the H pawn, the pawn will promote. So we have to take that. But the question is, while we taking the H pawn one by one, can the black king like destroy our queen side? That is a question for you all. Think about it. So what you're gonna do if you play black? For example, if black play king to d5, if you take, so black can break our queen side. Does anyone want to try? And we can play. So for example, Jaden?
Is it white to move or is it black to move?
Now it's black to move. So white has
King to d4.
king to d4, and naturally I think white has to take the pawn.
King to e3.
But before moving the king, what are you gonna do after king to e3?
King to d2.
Can we do that, king to d2?
You can't really do that because the d pawn will be pushed.
Exactly. So that's the strength of connected pawns. We cannot simply move the king to d2. But can black have something else to do? I don't know. I'm just curious. I'm not sure. I'm just checking. So, for example, if I play b5, what you gonna do? If you guys play as white, what you gonna do? c4. I got the message. c4. And any other thoughts? This is about king pawn endgame. I love this one. Okay, let me ask around the table. Like I have an idea like c4. And Jane, what do you think? What would be your idea?
It's hard to decide
It's really hard.
because if you move the pawn, you lose the d pawn,
I mean, lose.
and there's an attack basically. So
Can we put?
maybe I would do something which kind of stops the whole thing, which is I would move b4.
You move pawn to b4.
Yes.
Okay, we'll see. Thank you very much. I got a message from Vicky, king h5, taking the pawn. We have to take that anyway, but the question is about when. But we can talk about that. And Jaden, do you have any idea what you're gonna do?
I'm going to take the pawn.
You don't take h5, then what
I
you do?
take h5.
Oh, you take h5. Okay, so we have 2 votes. King h5. Let's try this first because we get more votes. And I will talk about the rest later. So my idea, I cannot move the king to d2 because we know the white pawn, the d pawn will go up, and I cannot catch up. I put an a5. What is my plan? And what you guys gonna do? Vicky, do you have any idea? You like message like king h5, right? If I push pawn to a5, what you gonna do?
King G.
Your cat is pressing your button, Vicky. It like muted you. Do you say king g4, I guess? I hear king g something.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Clara also left the message. Bring the king. Are you thinking something this thing? King g4?
It's either King G4 or King G5.
Okay, then which one do you prefer? King g4 or king g5? I think the answer depends on where will we move the king. So if we want to move the king like downward, I mean king g4, we can move to g3 to f3 just in one move. But if we want to, for example, like moving to attack the black pawn, maybe I mean if we move the king to g4, we can still like move to f5 in one move. But if we move to g5, we have to use two moves to f3. I'm not sure if you follow my point. I mean, I think in my idea, I think king g4 is I mean, more flexible because we can choose either moving to f5 or f3. It just takes us like one move. But if I move king to g5, and if we realize moving the king downward is the best choice, we need like two moves. So I think king to g4 is better. But anyway, we need to move the king close to the pawn. That's right. So what about a b4?
And also maybe king g6, because the black king can't really do opposition, and you get and then you get behind the black pawns.
Okay, but do our pawn need some support for our king? We move the king like too far away from our pawn. I'm not sure if mm, I'm not sure. Vicky, do you want to add something?
Pawn takes b4.
Pawn takes b4. Let's see what is the plan from black. And then we can of course like change our idea. Let's try king g4 first. If you take my pawn, I take yours. What is the move from white? Or what is the plan of black? Then we can read. I think we need to move. I mean, can we push the pawn? Push it. If we simply push the pawn, I think we will get a draw. Black king will eating all the pawns. b3. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't know. Can we push the pawn to b3? It pawn to c3 and king move to here. Take the pawn d4. Which one is faster? You have a queen, I have a queen. And I don't think there is a way I can, for example, win the queen. So b3, it just ended up as another draw. So if I move the king to f4, f3 regardless, so I think the reason black pushed the pawn is trying to break the pawn structure, like b3. And if you don't take it, like c4, I take yours. You play here. Which one is faster? I don't know. You have a queen. I have b2. Can white win in this position? Does anyone know how can white win? Jada?
Queen to a6.
A6. Then I move king to b3.
King b3. Queen to b5.
b5, king to c2.
King to c2. Queen to c4.
King to c4, king to b1.
Queen to a2.
King to a2, king to c1.
Oh no, can I go back?
Yes.
Queen to b3, check.
King to c1.
Mm, uh, Queen to c3.
Then I have to move king like in front of my pawn. And what you gonna do?
Uh, uh, get my king closer.
Exactly, king to e2. And let me finish the one left. Good job. So king goes to a2 and you can ping the pawn. You have like more than one way to, but beware, don't play king to d2. That's a stalemate. But you can move king to d3, king to c1, and you can ping the pawn again. The king has to go to
You
b1.
could just have play like queen to c4 check. You could just play queen c2, mate, if you wanted to.
You're right. You're right. You're better than me than doing this. I'm so stuck in this old way to win the pawn and then checkmate. But you're right. King c2. That's the mate. Okay. So I'm just trying like does b3 work, and a c4 turned out to be a good move. And think if white take the pawn, white can get a queen like faster. But if you take the b3 pawn, black take the pawn, can black get a draw? Can? But how? If I play king to f4, what are you gonna do? King to d4. If you push pawn, the king will get close to take the pawn because the white king is quite far away, and black will take the pawn. So c4 is better. Okay, so yeah, that was my question that coming from here. So do we need to worry about the trade? But the answer is I think we don't need to worry about that. I think because we have like up 2 pawns at the queen side and they're connected. Connected pawns super important. And also I think someone talked about like b4, right? Jane, that's from you. I think b4 also worked. b4 can stop these 2 pawns and this 2 pawn connected, so which means the king cannot take our c2 because they are connected. If you take c2, I can promote and I can take the pawn and I can gradually move the king to either winning the rest of the pawn or having this pawn promote. I think b4 is also a good move, but c4 I'm not sure. Does this one work? For example, if black takes the pawn, you have to take that, king takes. I mean, maybe black king is quicker than us because our king is quite far away from the left side. I think black can promote. So I think c4 is a mistake. Cool. So back to the position. I think h3 is something we can try. So one last thing. What about rook to e2? Can we still get the balanced position? I think we can. We can take the pawn and take this one. If black take that, we can take f3, and if I take this one, and we have removed this scary like pawn, like connected pawns. And even though these 2 pawns are like scattered, but I think it's quite balanced. It's equalized. If you turn on the engine, I think it's very. I mean, maybe white is slightly better because of the king has a better position than the black king. You see 0.01, so it's a drawish position. So h3, breaking the connected pawns, is something we have to do. And I think this game, going from here, we can realize the power of connected pawns in the end game, right? Because if black doesn't have the connected pawns, if black have a pawn at e5, I don't think we will have this like threat later on. But once black have this connected pawn, they are so powerful, and the game ended up as because we didn't have a chance to break that. I think black rook is so free, and our rook has to stuck here. Our king is stuck here, but this rook is so free, and this rook like basically take up the majority of our pawns, and black win eventually. Cool, that is the game I would like to share. But I have some other position I would like to discuss. Let's look at this one. It's still about piece exchange. Okay, it's still about piece exchange. So in this position, black to move. Now white has a bishop offering a trade with our c4 bishop. So what is the best move to deal with the trade? So for example, should we take the bishop immediately? Or should we move the bishop maybe back to b5? I don't know. Or maybe should we move the rook and waiting our opponent taking our bishop? We can take it up with our rook. Or maybe take the knight as exchange. So what do you think? It's black to move. What is the best move for black? And I will ask around the table later. Clara.
All I can think of is taking the c3 knight. So then,
This knight.
all I can think of is taking the c3 knight. But I don't know how I can take the c3 knight.
You mean take the c3 knight?
Yeah. So then try and get my knight to f2.
Knight to f2. But why does knight to f2 has anything to do with the c3 knight?
Because there's also a checkmate, but I didn't know if that's actually possible in there. But my first thing is to do a queen fork. So if the queen takes so then I have to take the e4 pawn.
You mean with the knight?
Yeah, but then the c3 knight is protecting it.
Yeah, that's true. So the e4 pawn is protected. Yeah, if we can move the knight to e5 or g5 somehow, we can maybe move knight to f2. At least I think we can win the rook. But the
maybe the game.
Sorry?
Or maybe the game, because there might be a smothered mate.
Sorry, I don't understand. Well, what do you mean?
We might win the game because there might be a smothered mate.
Yeah. If we have the way to like smother mate. But I think rook has to take us. Yeah. If the king goes to g1, knight h3, king h1, king g1, rook g1, knight f3, knight f2. Yes, you're right. Yeah, I mean, if we have the chance, yeah, we can move the knight to f2. I like that. But I'm not sure if we have the chance in reality because knight is protecting e4. If we can kick the knight away, at least if we can move the knight away, we can make the e4 pawn weak. And hopefully we can win e4 and later move knight to f2. And another approach is maybe move the knight to g4 and later to f2. But to be honest, I don't think we can do that immediately because white has the bishop and the queen protecting g4. But good thinking, good thought. It's good that we look at the whole board and to see the opportunity. And Vicky, what do you think? What you gonna do? Are you going to take the bishop or take the knight? Or, I mean, I don't know, move the rook, protect the bishop with some pieces, or move the bishop back to somewhere? What you gonna do, Vicky?
Bishop takes b3.
Takes b3. Any reason?
After pawn b3, I can play rook to b8.
Rook to b8, for example. Which rook?
The a rook.
A rook. Are we losing the a6? I'm not sure.
The b3 pawn.
Okay, we can maybe take the b pawn back. Then let's try that on the board. What about maybe bishop to c4 first? I can protect the pawn, and later I can take your a6. And how would you deal with this a6? How would you do it?
To A5.
On the a5? Okay, then what about knight to d5? I'm just playing around. I'm kicking a queen, attacking these two pieces. Are you going to take my knight?
E5.
You will take that, right? Yeah, then I move my queen to d5. I have a queen at the center and attacking your a5. How would you protect the a5 pawn? Maybe the rook back to a8 or bishop to d8.
Bishop to D8.
Bishop to d8. We can use a bishop protect the pawn. It's better than using a rook. And what about I move this rook to d1, attacking your d6.
Queen to F2.
Into f2. What about rook to d2? And later I can take d6 pawn. Okay, so yeah, we don't have to work through the details, but the thing is, let's go back to this bishop trade with the knight. So bishop take the knight, pawn takes, and it's clear that the white has this double pawn, right? This double pawn, and we all know double pawns are bad. They cannot protect each other, and it's a little bit hard for white to create a pass pawn later because these two pawn, yeah, they just doubled. But on the other hand, can we like attack these two pawns very easily? Maybe not, because the pawn in front of us is either light square, and we don't have a light square bishop. White has a light square bishop. So for example, the bishop can move to c4 to protect the pawn. And also meanwhile, the bishop can attack our a6. So this is something we need to evaluate. I'm not talking about like bishop b3 is a bad move. It's just evaluating what is the good things, what are the bad things, and what is a weakness we created, what is a weakness from our side. So these two pawns are not good. But on the other hand, it's not easy to attack as well, because the light square bishop can protect that in one move. And we cannot, at least to me, it's not easy to kick the bishop away. The bishop can control the d5, like the outpost, and also protect b3, and also attack a6. So this is what happened if we take the knight. Okay, but thank you for the input. I remember review like all the possibilities before we collect all the ideas. So Jaden, you left a message, bishop e2. Any reason?
Bishop to e2. If knight takes, then we can just take the pawn.
Yeah, but I mean, if I realize the knight is protecting e4, I think knight is very likely to take that with the queen instead, right?
Don't know what to do afterwards.
Yeah. So yeah, sometimes if we think from opponent's perspective, it's good that we think the best move from our opponent. Then we can make the good choice. So if we take the bishop, I think the queen moves to e2, and the queen replace the bishop, attacking over a6, and later the move can move to d1, attack over d6. We don't have anything changed from black's perspective. The black pieces are at the exact same place as before the trading, but white move the queen from d1 to e2. That's it. If we compare this position with taking the knight, I mean, the good thing for black is we have the double pawns, but the downside for black is white has a very powerful light square bishop. If we trade the bishop is not there. The b3 knight, I don't know, maybe the b3 knight is can have more potential. Maybe the knight can move to a5 and later to c4 to attack our queen and the pawn. I don't know. Yeah. So that is the evaluation. But does anyone have any idea maybe move the rook to support the bishop instead of trading the bishop immediately, or move the bishop to b5? Does anyone has this idea like come into mind? Jane, what do you think? What would be your choice?
I like rook to c8 more.
Any reason?
I just want to be a bit passive because we can wait for them to take, but also we can keep the bishop, so we pin their bishop and then we keep our bishop pinning theirs.
Yeah, I like this idea. So if we compare the position, I really like your mentioning that our bishop is actually pinned in the a2 bishop, which means it's not easy for white to move the bishop like away from e2. So we can take the bishop maybe in the next move. We don't have to take that right now. Clara, anything you want to add up?
That means you can maybe go knight to g4.
Right now?
Maybe, I don't know. But the bishop.
You're really into this idea, maybe knight e3 or knight f2. I think white will take our knight. And if you take the bishop, yeah, that's a pin. You can take the bishop. You can take the rook. But after the trade, I think the whole exchange favors white, because white lost the rook, which is worth 5 points, but white won a knight plus a bishop, which is altogether 6 or 7 points. So yeah, if I play white, I would be happy for this trade. Jaden, anything you want to add up?
You could play like I don't like. Also, if you like take it, and black takes your rook, and you take back. If black just plays something random, you can play knight to d5.
Yeah, knight d5 is also a very powerful move. The knight controls the d5 and it will stay there forever. The knight will be so strong, attacking our bishop and maybe like preparing f6. So coming back to the idea like rook c8, I like the idea. First of all, we don't have to take the bishop right now. We can take that maybe later because the e2 bishop is pinned. I like the reasoning. Another thing is, if white take our bishop, we take that. If we compare this position with taking the e2 bishop, king moves to e2, I think the first one is better for black because we improve the position of the rook. The rook used to be at f8. Now it was placed at c4. Isn't this one better? Because first of all, we can attack e4, right? And also, this is a semi-open file. Maybe sometime somehow we can attack c2. At least the rook is active, more active than being at f8. The rook c8, I like this idea. But you know what, everyone? So in this game, so black played the rook, move. None of us mentioned that is bishop b5. But does anyone want to guess what is the reason black moved the bishop to b5? This is the ultimate question I want to ask. What is in black's mind? Why black moved the bishop to b5? Or maybe we can put it this way. If white take our bishop, of course, we have to take that with a pawn. So anything different from, for example, rook to c8. And Jaden.
There will be an open A file.
Yes, that's true.
Probably be easier with black to get because he's already got a rook. White has a rook, but the rook is protected by the queen, so it makes it harder.
Good point. Good point.
The queen doesn't like being kicked around by rooks.
Good point. I think I mentioned quite some time that when we open the file, we need to be confident and sure that we can control the file. At least we don't lose the file, right? And I agree. So at least this is a 50-50, like controlling the A file. But anything else apart from opening up the A file? Any other things different from like maybe moving the rook to C8? Rook bishop to b5. If bishop take the pawn. Anything changed? Any piece moved? Lara.
The isolated pawn moves more towards the pawns.
Yeah. The a6 pawn moved to b5. It's still isolated though, but it improved its position. Why is that? Because when the pawn at a6, it's a target. It's isolated pawn on the semi-open file. And the white can attack that. Remember, we take the bishop, the queen, and the rook, can attack the pawn, and our queen and the rook has to protect that. We are passive, protecting the pawn. And if we take the knight, the bishop and the rook can aim at the pawn. Even though we push the a5, it's still a target. I mean, white can attack it from the a file or somehow from the d file, because I moved knight to d5 after exchange to move the queen. So white can attack the pawn in some way. But once the bishop moved to b5, we take that with the pawn. First of all, the a6 pawn moved to b5. It's still isolated, but it's not at a semi-open file, which means it would be harder for white to attack our pawn. And another thing is, I think some of you mentioned, we want to attack the e4 pawn, right? How can we attack the e4? One way that is kick the defender away. Once our pawn moved to b5, b4 is coming. We can kick the knight, and then we can make the e4 pawn weaker. So in this game, the white played knight d5, attack the queen, attack the knight, forcing black take the knight, white takes it back, and rook a4, looking at this rook, how active it is after opening this a file. And rook a4, it's also a very interesting move that black offer exchange, right? But instead of instead of make the rook at a8, it moved the rook to a4 to exchange. If white take the rook, black can improve the position of the pawn again. Because your pawn from b5 to a4 is moved back to a file, but it attacked the knight and make the b2 pawn weak. So this is another very good tactic that black has utilized, like using piece exchange to improve piece position. So rook to a4, if you take mine, I can improve my position of my pawn. So this is very good, impressive. And the white play c3, and black move queen to a6. We all know that black is fighting at the a file. And h3, white want to solve the problem at the background. And rook c8, the rook is going to c4, attack e4. And rook fe1 and h6, black also solved the problem in advance of the background. And king h2, and bishop to g5. The bishop is very active on this diagonal. If you look at the bishop at the e7, it's blocked. But the bishop at g5, it's very active, aiming at this diagonal. And g3, I think black don't want to like bishop check or something. But this move makes this second rank like exposed. And queen e7 makes sense. Queen to cf2, and king g2. Now black made another interesting move. Rook to a2, attack the pawn. And also, if white take the rook, we can improve the position of our queen to a2 because of the exchange. And yeah, and in this position, black is way better. So it actually finalized very soon. Rook c3, and white resigned. And the reason is quite straightforward. If you take my rook, I can play queen to f2. And if you don't take my rook, I can move rook to f3. It's still queen f2. So I think this game is this position a very good example to showcase that how can we deal with a trade. Maybe we can move the position a little bit to improve the position of some other pieces. And I can quickly show you another example, like this one. This is very similar as the last one. So here, black to move. And we have same pieces on the board. Now, white has a like bishop exchange at g2, attacking our bishop. Maybe white move the rook to b5 to force the trade. So the question is, how would you deal with the trade? We have maybe three options. Think about it. First is trade that immediately. The second is refuse, maybe move the bishop back to e6. Otherwise, the bishop will be captured. Trade immediately, bishop e3. The third choice is bishop back to c6. So my question is, which one would you prefer? This is the last question for today. In front of this bishop trade, which move would you choose? I don't think we have a fourth option because we don't have any other piece protecting d5 bishop. And pushing pawn e4, just giving up the pawn. The question is, where should we move the bishop? Trade the g2 bishop, bishop e. Oh, of course, we can also move the bishop to a2 if you want. But I don't think bishop a2 is a good position in my eyes. Jaden, what do you think?
I think bishop to c6.
So,
Because the guy can attack his rook.
yeah, I mean, we can analyze the position. So rook to bishop to c6. If the rook go back, we can maybe move, like place the bishop at here forever. If white take over bishop, we take that with a pawn. I think the previous question relies on which pawn we would like to see for black. Is the pawn at b6, b7 better, or is the pawn at c6 better? From black's perspective, which pawn is better? Which position is better for the pawn? b7 or c6? Vicky, what do you think? If we take the bishop, we will have the pawn at b7. If we play it at c6, maybe we'll have the pawn at c6. So which position is better? And Vicky, do you want to share some idea?
At b7, it's a passed pawn.
Yeah, that's one thing. b7 is a passed pawn. I think that's a good sign. Any downside with pawn being at b7?
At b7, it blocks the rook, and after we trade the bishops, you would have to move a piece to defend a pawn before we can activate our rook.
Yeah, the rook has to protect the pawn. Yeah, that's right. And we have a rook like right on b5 attacking our pawn. So that's a question. So we need to choose. Do we really want the passed pawn, or at the same time that is the pawn we have to protect at CBA? I mean, of course, I mean at c6 it's still an isolated pawn, but does it make white difficult, more difficult attack the pawn. White at c6. Are you raising your hand, Vicky? Go ahead.
At c6, it's also attacking the rook.
Yes. What if the rook moved to c5? Is there again? I mean, will that make the white pieces attacking the pawn a little difficult? Or does it make us easier to protect the pawn? For example, rook to c5.
And I think it's easier to protect it because, for example, now the queen can go to d6 or b6 and defend the pawn and attacking the rook.
Yes. Yes. I agree with your conclusion. So if we compare the position of the pawns, so if we take the bishop, the pawn at b7, so the rook is in front of us, and also the rook is already at the b file. The queen can move to b file in one move, and after the bishop to e3, the other rook can move to b file in one move. So white can basically 1, 2, 3. In 3 moves, white can double the rooks and queen to attack b7. But if we move bishop to c6, try rook to c5. So first of all, the bishop at c1, the bishop actually blocked the rook to c1 to c file, and also it's our turn to move, right? Because we attack the rook first, and we can move the rook queen to d6. And if the bishop moves to e3, we can probably offer a trade. So we can remove the attacker and move the rook to b8. So when it comes to the position of the pawn, I think c6 pawn is better than b7. Or if you agree c6 pawn is better than b7, it's better to move your bishop to c6. So that's the idea. So we can, when we look at the trade, we need to think about, should we move it away? I mean, bishop e6 is not a good choice because we'll lose b7. So it's either taking the bishop or move it back to c6. And between these two moves, I think bishop c6 is better. Okay, so for today we review the positions, and also now we're focusing a lot on piece exchange. So even though sometimes the difference is tiny, it's still worth reviewing the position over and over again. It helps our way to be sensitive on the chessboard. And I hope you will feel that one day. Maybe you already feel that in some way. Cool. Then that's it for today. Thank you very much. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.